And following the gag order hearing, testimony resumed with David Pecker returning to the witness stand for a second day. He's the former CEO of American Media Incorporated, which is the parent company of the National Enquirer. Pecker revealed he was present at Trump's 2015 campaign announcement at Trump Tower and said former Trump attorney Michael Cohen told him he should be there. 2 months later, the three men then had a meeting. That's when prosecutors alleged the election scheme was hatched. Specifically, Pecker told Trump and Cohen he would be their, quote, eyes and ears on stories that could be damaging to Trump. Additionally, he told them he would run positive stories about Trump and run negative stories about his opponents. The articles included stories about then-Trump rivals and now allies, Senators Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio and Ben Carson. Pecker said Cohen would call and say, we would like you to run an article on a specific target. The Enquirer would then embellish it from there. When asked who the we was that Cohen referred to, Pecker said he understood it to mean Cohen and Trump. So, Barbara, I'll start with you and then Lisa. Can you go back to what is the law that prosecutors are trying to prove that Trump broke, or what is the crime that Trump committed that he's sitting there in court for? And how does Pecker's testimony help corroborate that in any way?
Well, of course, the law here is falsification of business records to conceal the commission of another crime. And I think what the prosecutors have done that is very helpful here is to start with the crime and then talk about the falsification of the business records as the cover-up, because that's really what it was, and that's why it matters. So here, the crime is a statute under New York law, 17-152, that makes it a crime to conspire to promote or prevent the election of any candidate to office by unlawful means. And the unlawful means here is campaign expenditures without an intent to report them. And so Michael Cohen paid $130,000. The National Enquirer paid $30,000 to the doorman and $120,000 to Karen McDougal. It's those payments that make this illegal. So the moment that money changes hands, the crime is committed. And in fact, it's enough that they falsified these with the intent to do that. But they've also got that evidence of illegal campaign expenditures, and that plan, that conspiracy to violate that statute, 17-152, occurred on that day in August of 2015, and it extended all the way through the election and beyond throughout this cover-up.
So, Lisa, I'm curious about, I know this is sort of looking at sort of the exterior of things, but in the courtroom, just the demeanor of Trump and just watching this closely from home, seeing him coming into court from the beginning, I feel like, I don't want to overstate it, but he seems very subdued. It seems his colorful personality is almost turned gray, if I could. And I just wonder if it's the walking in and having to sit down, cameras in his face, arch enemies in the courtroom every day. Is it getting to him, or is it the case itself that's bothering him? All of it? What are you seeing in the courtroom play out? I mean, you think about David Pecker sitting there and everybody asking David Pecker or talking on the air about questions about what David Pecker knows. I'm thinking it's possible that David Pecker has a few more secrets about Donald Trump than the ones that are being discussed.
I think you're absolutely right, Mika, and I expect David Pecker to be on the stand through the end of the week. I think the prosecution still has at least several more hours of direct testimony with David Pecker. What makes me say that? Well, first of all, we left off yesterday with the beginning of the Karen McDougal settlement, and that means we have to talk through that story, the Stormy Daniels settlement and the Enquirer's involvement in that. But also, as you mentioned, through 2017, when we know that David Pecker saw Trump at least twice, where he was thanked by Trump for his contributions to the election. So there's a lot of ground chronologically still to cover. And as you noted, a lot of conversations still to testify to. David Pecker testified yesterday to at least 2 conversations directly with Donald Trump. That August 2015 meeting that Trump and Cohen invited him to, and when he got to, asked him essentially, what can you do for us in relation to the campaign? What can you personally do? What can the Inquirer do? And that's how David Pecker came up with I'll be your eyes and ears. He also talked about a conversation on the phone with Donald Trump when Karen McDougal surfaced, when Trump solicited his advice and basically said, Michael has told me about Karen. What do you think? But we know from David Pecker's beginning testimony that he talked to Trump once he became a candidate at least once a week by phone and says he saw him in person once a month. What's particularly notable about that is Pecker says he saw and talked to Trump more after he became a candidate than he did before. I don't know about you, but usually when people run for president of the United States and become a major party nominee, they have a whole lot less time for the other people in their life as they're blanketing the country for their campaigns. So I think we have a lot more to hear from David Pecker in the days to come.
Absolutely. Mara Gay, I'm just thinking about the checkbook journalism that was really laid out in full display in the courtroom, and I'm trying to think of what the jurors were thinking. I mean, definitely when I was growing up, I'm not sure, you're a little younger, just going to the grocery store with my mom. There was the National Enquirer, and there were crazy pictures of famous people, you know, and crazy stories. And I just wonder, is the theme here that the Enquirer could move the meter on the way people think? Do people see it as journalism? Is this surprising to the jury? Or do they see it as a joke like most of us in this world do? Or is it somewhere in the middle?
You know, I'm glad you brought that up, Mika, because one of the most disturbing parts as a journalist of this case to me is David Pecker's description is checkbook journalism. I wouldn't call it journalism at all, in fact. But, you know, generally you don't pay for stories. We don't do that. That's just not how journalists operate when they're ethical, and news organizations don't operate that way. But the thing about the National Enquirer is, number one, it's a throwback. I mean, I think that anybody under the age of 25 is saying, what? Who?
What
when?
Are you talking
what
about?
Are you even talking about? But I do think it really feeds into, you know, what you're talking about, which is you used to see it at the grocery store right before you checked out, and you'd say, oh, gee, I wonder if that's true. And that is kind of a hallmark of what Donald Trump does and those around him he instructs them to do, which is just to introduce doubt, to plant a seed of whether it's a conspiracy or a lie, and allow it to blossom kind of naturally. And so that seems to be what he was doing by using David Pecker. And